In the hush of the medieval world, when time was measured not by minutes, but by the slow toll of bells, there lived a belief that everything, every flicker of flame, every cry of a night bird, every shadow cast on stone, meant something more. Beneath the weight of crown and cathedral, between frostbitten fields and flickering hearths, the people looked not only to scripture, but to signs. A falling star could change a kingdom. A cracked mirror might undo a family line. Imagine the soft glow of a single candle in a stone chamber, its light trembling across ink-stained parchment. Beyond the narrow window, wind curls over a silent village. The stars above are sharp and watching. Somewhere, a mother whispers a charm over her child's cradle. Somewhere else, a monk pauses before copying a line he dreamed the night before. This was an age of closeness to mystery, when the unseen walked among the seen, and the line between belief and fear blurred. The world was vast, yes, but more than that, it was alive with meaning. And every omen, no matter how strange, was a guidepost for the soul. Let us begin gently with the first sign in the dark. Level 1. The Raven at the Crossroads. In the dim hours before sunrise, when the village still slept and the frost clung to hedgerows like whispered prayers, the raven perched at the crossroads was not simply a bird. It was a sign. Its black feathers gleamed like wet ink, unmoving as its pale eyes watched the empty path stretching in four directions. In medieval minds, crossroads were more than intersections of travel. They were the meeting point of fate and the unknown, the place where choices were weighed by forces far beyond the understanding of ordinary folk. A raven seen there, especially at dawn or dusk, was taken as an omen of change or of loss. Some believed it was the soul of the unburied, returning to linger at the place it departed. Others claimed the bird brought warnings from beyond, where saints and sinners alike whispered across veils too thin to see. In a hamlet near Canterbury, it is said that no child would step across a crossroads without first tossing a stone behind them and whispering a protection. For once, a man ignored the raven's cry, and by nightfall his cottage stood empty, the hearth still warm, but the bed untouched. So begins our journey, where feathers mark the path forward. Level 2. The Cursed Bloom of Mandragora. Beneath the hanging roots of an ancient elm, the earth breathes softly in a wooded hollow. Here, in the shadowed soil of medieval Europe, the mandrake grows, not like other plants, but in shapes too close to human form. It was said to cry when torn from the ground, a wail that could stop the heart of any who heard it. Monks recorded its powers with trembling ink: protection, fertility, even love, but always at a price. In 13th century Saxony, a midwife wandered into the forest before dawn, searching for healing roots. She carried a black dog and a silver spoon, for lore demanded one never touch the mandrake directly. When she found the twisted stalk, she tied the leash and turned away. The dog pulled. The scream was silent, but still it came. The dog fell still. The root was taken home. She never spoke of what she saw that night, but the villagers noted her shadow moved differently afterward, like it remembered another shape. They buried the mandrake deep a year later, though no one had died. In that root, they said, slept more than medicine. It remembered too much. And now, we walk from root to relic, toward what was left behind in bone. Level 3. The Bone That Bled. Within the cool stone crypts of medieval cathedrals, behind iron gates and under wax-dripped arches, rested the bones of saints. Each fragment wrapped in silk, sealed in gold, and watched with reverence. Relics were not mere remains. They were vessels of grace, intermediaries between earth and heaven. But when one bled, it meant more than holiness. It meant something stirred. In 1281 Florence, as the feast of Saint Verena drew near, the reliquary was placed on the altar. As prayers rose, a thin bead of crimson welled from the rib within. Those gathered dropped to their knees, their voices swallowed by a silence deeper than awe. The bishop ordered fasting. The city feared plague. No explanation ever came. Pilgrims whispered that the saint had seen something yet to come. Others believed the blood was not hers, but from a wound reopened in the world. For weeks, the relic remained untouched. Some swore the scent of rosewater hung in the air. Others, iron. Faith is rarely quiet, and when it speaks through bone, it does not shout, it weeps. Let us leave the altar now and look upward to the signs that shimmered and vanished in the sky. Level 4. The star that shook the earth. When the sky burned, the earth held its breath. In the year 1066, a great star stretched its flaming tail across the heavens. In villages from Normandy to Northumbria, peasants fell to their knees in the fields, unsure whether to pray or flee. For this was no ordinary star. It moved too swiftly, too bright. It was a messenger. To the learned men in abbeys, it was a comet. To the common folk, it was a harbinger. In England, it appeared weeks before King Harold fell at Hastings. The monks in Winchester recorded it in trembling script, a fearsome sign, like a sword in the heavens. Some believed it pointed not to war, but to judgment, to fate itself. In later years, storytellers would say that when the star vanished, the king's fate was sealed, that the burning line in the sky had carved the path of arrows before they flew. Such was the power of the heavens in medieval minds. Stars did not merely shine. They remembered, they warned. And now, from the sky to the skin, we descend toward the living mark, etched not by hand, but by something older than belief. Level 5. The Mark of the Witch. She did not scream when they found it. A small bruise behind her left shoulder, the shape uncertain, the color dark. The villagers in 14th century Bohemia whispered that it had not been there the week before, that it had appeared after the strange storm, after the cows refused to milk, after the child's fever took him in the night. The midwife had no answers. The witch's mark was feared above all, a sign not of guilt, but of connection, something given, not chosen. A touch from the unseen, often no more than a mole or scar, but in the Middle Ages, it bore unbearable weight. Trials followed discovery. Water, fire, silence, a rope. The mark was proof enough. This woman, Ilsa, refused to name names. She sat still while they questioned her. On the morning she vanished from her cell, the bruise was found pressed into the wooden bench like ink from skin. The mark lingered long after she was gone. The priest burned the seat. Still, no one sat there again. We leave now the condemned and the accused, and turn toward shelter, toward wooden walls, where even doors were carved to keep danger out. Level 6. The door that faced the north wind. In the colder corners of the English countryside, wind from the north was not merely a chill. It was an omen. Builders turned doors away from it, for it was believed that the north wind carried more than weather. It bore sorrow, sickness, and whispers from places better left undisturbed. To sleep with one's door facing north was to invite unrest, and perhaps something colder than frost. In a hamlet near York, a cottage once stood stubbornly with its entrance to the north. The family who lived within suffered misfortune after misfortune. Sour milk, withered crops, and a baby born too soon who never cried once. Neighbors begged them to board it up. They did. The wind still howled, but no longer entered. Slowly, the misfortunes ceased. Superstition became architecture. Doors were set askew, thresholds protected with salt, and herbs were nailed into beams. It was not just a fear of wind, but of what moved with it, what might slip through the crack at dusk when the fire was low and prayers were late. And now, we leave that sealed door behind and turn to eyes that glint in the dark. Eyes that see more than they should and never blink. Level 7. Eyes in the Cat's Gaze. By hearth and by hayloft, the medieval cat watched. Its presence was both blessing and burden. Farmers praised it for chasing mice from grain, yet turned away when it stared too long without moving. In much of Europe, a black cat crossing one's path was cause enough to halt a journey, or to spit over the left shoulder and pray. In a village near Krakow, a woman lived alone with a cat named Liska, black as midnight, with golden eyes. After her neighbor's cow fell ill and a child began muttering names in sleep, Liska was blamed. They said the cat watched too closely, always from the shadows, always with something behind its gaze. Salt was cast. The door was barred. But each morning, Liska sat in the same spot, by the well, unmoving as if guarding something buried. The woman vanished in winter. Liska remained for another year, never aging, never meowing. When the cat finally left, the village found a pile of tiny bones beneath the woman's hearth. Some said it was just a cat. Others said she had never truly been alone. Now we look away from those eyes and walk into fields where petals bloom with secrets. Level 8. The flower that should not bloom. Not all beauty brought comfort. In medieval gardens and meadows, certain blooms were feared when they appeared at the wrong time. A red blossom in winter or a violet before Lent was taken as a message, gentle on the surface but heavy beneath. Nature's rhythm was believed to echo divine will, and when it broke pattern, it broke peace. In a monastery tucked into the hills of Burgundy, a single flower bloomed outside the chapel door on the feast of St. Jude. Snow still blanketed the stone steps. The flower, blood-red and soft as breath, leaned toward the altar. The monks gathered in silence. By morning, their abbot, old and quiet and full of scripture, was gone, his bed unslept in, his robes neatly folded at the foot of the cot. No one touched the flower. It withered in 3 days. The patch where it grew never held plant again. The monks planted thyme and rosemary around the chapel after that, herbs of memory, of cleansing. But they never knelt near that spot again. Now let us step lightly toward twilight, where birds call out before night falls, and sometimes too soon. Level 9. The daytime cry of the owl. Owls belong to the night. Their hoot was the sound of sleep, of wisdom, of things best left hidden. But when an owl called in broad daylight, it was believed to be a sign that death had already begun its journey toward the village. Their eyes, wide and knowing, were said to glimpse what others could not, the soul as it prepared to leave. In Provence, an owl called out just before noon, circling the courtyard of a manor where a feast was being prepared. The cook dropped her ladle. The gardener made the sign of the cross. Hours later, the baron collapsed before his first cup of wine, dead with no wound, no warning. The owl was not seen again. Children were taught to mimic the owl's cry in games, but never in the sunlight. It was an invitation, they said, and not a kind one. From the owl's cry to the edge of sleep, we move now toward dreams, where truth and omen often meet, where what we see with closed eyes sometimes marks what will be seen no more. Level 10. The dream that drew blood. In the quiet chambers of abbeys and manors, dreams were never dismissed. They were visited, interpreted, sometimes feared. A dream could carry warning, deliver grace, or speak of things too distant for waking minds. But when a dream left a mark on the body, when it bled into flesh, it became more than vision. It became evidence. A bishop in Languedoc dreamt he was drowning in red water. He thrashed, praying beneath the surface, and awoke breathless. Blood stained his linen. No wound could be found. The physicians said it was the nose, the pressure of deep sleep. But the bishop fasted for a week and never returned to his chambers again. He moved to the cloisters and walked barefoot in the cold. Dreams, they said, could reach beyond the mind. And sometimes the body remembered what the eyes had not seen. A servant who burned the bishop's sheets swore she heard rushing water when the cloth caught flame. We close this chapter with eyes half-lidded, drifting deeper into the hush. The dreams will wait, but so will the bells. And when they ring without hands, something old has begun again. Level 11. When bells rang without hands. In the stillness of early evening, when shadows stretched long across the cloister walls, the ringing of a bell without human hand was enough to halt breath. Bells were sacred instruments, meant to call the faithful, to mark the hours, to drive away storms and silent spirits. When they moved alone, the living paused and the dead were remembered. In 1354, in a hilltop village overlooking Rocamadour, the bell above the chapel rang 3 times just after midnight. No wind stirred. The rope hung untouched. The priest, roused from sleep, climbed the tower alone. He found no one there, but the room held a faint scent of myrrh and cold iron. That week, a rockslide buried half the southern quarter of the village. Stories spread quickly. It was said that the bell did not warn, but mourn before the earth itself did. From that year on, the bell rope was unknotted only on feast days. The rest of the time, it hung slack, heavy with silence. When bells speak without cause, they are not calling the living. They are marking a crossing. And now, we step beyond the gates, where animals gather, and the wind is not the only one howling. Level 12. The Hound Who Howled at Graves. Dogs held a special place in the medieval world. Watchers, protectors, and sometimes silent prophets. It was said they could sense what others could not. Illness, spirits, or sorrow yet to come. A hound howling at a grave was not just a cry into the night. It was a warning. Something had stirred beneath the soil. In the churchyard near Durham, a shepherd's dog took to sitting beside a tomb that no one visited. Each evening, as the sky turned slate blue, the dog would raise its snout and release a long, hollow cry. At first, the villagers thought it grief. Then came the illness, swift, silent, claiming the town's miller and 2 children in 3 days. The priest ordered the dog driven away. It returned the next evening. Only after a salt circle was laid did the howling cease. The grave, they later discovered, belonged to a stonemason buried without rites. His name had been chiseled off long ago. Not all who rest do so peacefully, and not all mourners walk on 2 legs. Now we move toward the glassy surface of reflection, where light misbehaves and the familiar becomes foreign. Level 13. The Mirror Covered in Moonlight. In households where illness visited or death lingered, mirrors were swiftly covered, shrouded with cloth, veiled in darkness. It was believed that a soul, recently loosed from the body, might mistake the reflection for a way back in. Or worse, that the mirror might capture what no longer belonged to the living. During a plague season in Prague, a family forgot to cover the tall mirror in their parlor after a cousin passed in the guest bed. That night, the youngest son awoke screaming, claiming he had seen someone pale, with his own eyes, standing behind the glass. The next morning, the mirror cracked clean across. The boy never spoke again. When the glass was removed, the surface remained dim, as if shadow had etched itself into silver. In time, the mirror was sealed behind wood, the wall repainted, and the story buried with the family's name. But in whispered tales, it said that if moonlight hits the panel just right, a pale shape still stands where no one should. Let us leave that chamber now and warm ourselves by the flame. Though tonight, the candle has plans of its own. Level 12. The Hound Who Howled at Graves. Dogs held a special place in the medieval world. Watchers, protectors, and sometimes silent prophets. It was said they could sense what others could not. Illness, spirits, or sorrow yet to come. A hound howling at a grave was not just a cry into the night. It was a warning. Something had stirred beneath the soil. In the churchyard near Durham, a shepherd's dog took to sitting beside a tomb that no one visited. Each evening, as the sky turned slate blue, the dog would raise its snout and release a long, hollow cry. At first, the villagers thought it grief. Then came the illness, swift, silent, claiming the town's miller and 2 children in 3 days. The priest ordered the dog driven away. It returned the next evening. Only after a salt circle was laid did the howling cease. The grave, they later discovered, belonged to a stonemason buried without rites. His name had been chiseled off long ago. Not all who rest do so peacefully, and not all mourners walk on 2 legs. Now we move toward the glassy surface of reflection, where light misbehaves and the familiar becomes foreign. Level 15. The Child Born with Teeth. In the hush of a midwinter morning, a scream echoed from a thatched cottage in a village near Curlian. A child had entered the world with 2 white teeth already cut through the gums. The midwife crossed herself. The mother wept, not from pain, but from a deep, bone-rooted fear. A child born with teeth was seen as a sign. Some said the babe would grow into a prophet, others a curse. In some regions, they were buried rather than baptized. The reasoning was unspoken, but understood. Something had arrived ahead of its time, and time did not always take kindly to such arrivals. The boy, named Auric, never cried. He watched the world with eyes that blinked too little. By his first year, birds refused to nest near their roof. By his third, the well turned black. The family left in the night, abandoning the cottage. It was pulled down stone by stone. Some say the teeth remained beneath the floorboards. Others claim they heard him speaking full sentences in the garden, though no one had taught him to speak. Now, with silence in our throat, we walk to the well. Not for water, but for whispers. Level 16. The Well That Whispered Names. Wells were more than water. They were mouths to the unseen, places where prayers were thrown like stones and sometimes answered in echoes. In medieval villages, it was not uncommon to bless a well, circle it thrice, or speak softly before drawing water, especially if the air felt too still or the rope too light. In a glen near Glastonbury, a stone-ringed well sat beneath an old ash tree. One autumn, the villagers began to speak of it in lowered voices. At dawn, when the mist clung low, the well began to whisper names. Never shouted, never clear, but names nonetheless. Some were known, some were not yet born. A woman heard her brother's name. He drowned that week. Another heard her own and left the village before winter. She never returned, but a child bearing her name was born the next year during a storm. They sealed the well with a wooden cover, carved with runes and crosses. Still, on certain mornings, those who passed by claimed they heard breath, not water, deep below. Let us leave the stone ring and step into sacred space, where bread once broke for blessing and instead began to bleed. Level 17. The Bleeding Bread of Pentecost. In cloister kitchens and parish tables, bread was holy. It carried the body of faith, the quiet promise of grace. But when bread bled, the sacred became strange. Miracles were recorded. Pilgrims wept. But in corners where belief bent toward fear, such bread was hidden, buried, or burned. In Bruges, on Pentecost morning, a young monk broke the host for communion. As he pressed the wafer, a red drop struck the altar cloth. It spread slowly, like ink and vellum. The monk froze. The abbot stepped forward, tasted the host, and turned away in silence. The chalice was emptied. The windows closed. Mass did not continue. No wound marked the monk's hands. The wafer was sealed in a reliquary, though some said it darkened with each day. What did it mean? They asked, when the sacred broke its silence. When symbol became substance, the townspeople fasted for a week. The fields were blessed, but still the cloth retained its stain. Let us leave the altar behind, where the stone font waits with still water. But something there moves just beneath the surface. Level 18. The shadow in the baptismal font. Baptism was purity, an entrance into grace, a cleansing of all before. Fonts were guarded, blessed, and watched carefully, for they were gates as well as vessels. But when something stirred in the water before the child was placed, people looked not to heaven, but to what might be rising. In a chapel near Kent, a boy was brought for baptism at first light. As the priest raised the ladle, the water rippled. No wind blew, no breath fell. A single dark shape passed beneath the surface, too fast to see clearly, but slow enough that those near the font stepped back. The child did not cry. The mother clutched her shawl until her knuckles paled. The baptism was completed, but the water was drained at once. Salt was scattered around the font. The priest insisted it was nothing, a trick of light perhaps, but he began his prayers anew each day after that, just in case. The child grew quiet, solemn. He never returned to the church, and the font, they say, still reflects more than it should. We turn now from water to fur and tongue, where an animal's touch leaves wounds that never close. Level 19. The lick of the dead dog. A loyal dog was a blessing, but a dog that licked a wound, and the wound would not heal, was feared in many parts of medieval Europe. They said it meant the animal had tasted death, that it bore some trace of the other side in its tongue. In Lubeck, a tanner named Jacob returned from the woods with a gash on his leg. His dog, Barda, licked it as he rested. The wound festered, though clean and tended. Jacob's color faded. At night, he moaned of footsteps pacing outside his window. When Barda vanished, no one thought much of it, until she was found curled beside a shallow grave near the river, her fur stiff, eyes open. No grave marker, no priest had come. The dog had returned to someone else's resting place. Jacob's wound never closed. He limped until spring, then simply stopped rising. His wife said he died in his sleep. Others weren't sure he had truly stopped breathing at all. Let us leave the low growl of memory and enter silence, the kind that precedes the storm but never brings the rain. Level 20. The silence before the storm that never came. It is said that when nature goes quiet, when birds cease, leaves still, and wind holds its breath, a storm is coming. But when the storm never arrives, the hush becomes something else entirely. It becomes an omen that never explains itself. In 1422, at a monastery near the Black Forest, the brothers woke to a strange stillness. The bells rang as usual. The prayers were whispered, but no birds sang. The trees did not stir. For 3 days the quiet held. No insects buzzed. No rain fell. Just a soft, waiting emptiness. Then, on the 4th night, 6 of the youngest brothers fell ill before Compline. No symptoms, just stillness, as if the silence had slipped inside. No storm broke. The skies remained clear, but the chapel felt heavier for months. The vines grew slowly. The bread rose strangely. Eventually, they planted rosemary along the eastern wall to invite the noise back. Some silences are warning. Others are witness. We end this chapter with quiet breath, as deeper signs stir beyond the edge of knowing. Level 20 is behind us. The path forward deepens. The omens wait. Level 21. The spider in the bridal veil. Weddings in the Middle Ages were more than union. They were covenant, public blessing, a tether between bloodlines and divine order. Every garment carried meaning, every adornment weight. And so, when a spider was found crawling through a bridal veil, it was not seen as mere mischief, but a message. In Milan, on the morning of her wedding, a young bride named Elena lifted her veil and found a single black spider nestled in the lace above her brow. Her mother gasped, snatched it away, and burned the veil in the hearth. A new one was hurriedly fetched, but the mood had shifted. Whispers followed Elena down the aisle. Her groom, a knight soon bound for Sicily, never returned from his campaign. No body was found, only a torn scrap of fabric in a ravine. In the years that followed, no bride in the city wore lace again. The seamstresses offered linen and silk, but kept lace under lock and key. Lace, they said, was too delicate a net, and too easily filled with things that should not be caught. Now, let us move from thread to sound, to a song without a singer that once drifted across the fields at dusk. Level 22, the song with no singer. Music was divine in the medieval world, a language given by heaven, echoing through psalters, cloisters, and village feasts. But when a melody drifted across empty fields or deserted halls with no singer to claim it, it became something else. A sign, a lament, a message from beyond. In the countryside of Lorraine, a plowman stopped his oxen just before sundown. Across the quiet air came a lilting melody, soft, wordless, unmistakably human. No figure walked the road. No breeze moved the grain. The song rose and fell 3 times before fading like mist. That night, his sister passed in her sleep, her hands folded over a psalter she hadn't touched in years. The man claimed the tune echoed from her childhood lullaby, one their mother had sung long ago. He hummed it again at her burial, and never again after. Villagers came to fear songs carried by no throat. If you heard one, they said you must not sing along. Now we step away from harmony and into shadow, toward a cloaked figure who passed through the crowd, but left no shadow of his own behind. Level 23, the cloaked figure with no shadow. Light reveals. It affirms presence, shape, being, and yet, in the medieval imagination, there were those who passed through sun and torchlight unmarked by shadow. These are not men, it was said, but something older or something that had forgotten how to belong. At the noon market in Avila, with the cathedral bell just rung, a cloaked figure walked between vendors. His hood was deep, his step sure, but where he passed, no shadow fell. The stones beneath him remained bare. A child screamed. The butcher dropped his blade. When the town guard gave chase, the figure turned down an alley. It was empty. Later that week, the cathedral's bell tower collapsed without wind, without warning. The figure was not seen again, but the stalls on that side of the square remained empty for months. Even the birds avoided them. They say a man without a shadow has already stepped too far from the world. That when he walks through your town, he carries not news, but consequence. Let us leave the open square behind and follow the wind in the tongues we no longer know, toward the words spoken by those who never learned them. Level 24, the tongue that spoke forgotten words. Language held power. It shaped prayer, law, charm, and curse. But when someone spoke in a tongue long buried, one they had never been taught, it stirred unease. For in the medieval mind, such speech came not from memory, but from spirit. In the hills of Picardy, a young girl awoke from a fever and began reciting a litany in perfect Latin. Her family were weavers, unlettered and unlearned. She spoke with rhythm and cadence, naming saints no longer known, quoting lines from Roman hymns preserved only in crumbling manuscripts. A traveling friar wept upon hearing her words. He claimed she had spoken the benediction of a martyr buried before Charlemagne ruled. The girl spoke for 3 days. On the fourth, her voice failed. She never remembered what she had said. The house remained quiet after that. Visitors noted a stillness to the air, like parchment sealed in wax. Her parents never spoke of it again. Let us turn now from voice to silence, from syllables to soil, and into the field where the cow would not eat. Level 25, the cow that refused the grain. Livestock knew things. They sensed storms before skies turned, illness before fever took hold. And when a cow refused to eat, not for hours, but for days, it was taken as more than stubbornness. It was an omen. Outside the town of Lyon, a prized milk cow named Morel stood motionless beside her trough. The feed was fresh. The air was mild. She turned her head each time grain was offered, her eyes fixed not on her master, but on the chapel beyond the field. On the third day, the farmer's wife died suddenly during childbirth. The priest declared a sorrowful, natural end. But villagers remembered the cow, how it had stilled, how it had waited. That evening, the beast gave a single mournful low, then returned to its feed as though nothing had passed. After that, farmers began to watch their animals differently. Silence meant something, hunger too, and refusal. Most of all, was a language all its own. We leave the field now and approach stone and tomb, where warmth lingers long after breath is gone. Level 26, the tomb that grew warm. Stone does not hold heat long in the damp breath of medieval chapels. Tombs remained cool, even in summer, their chill a quiet reassurance that the dead were at rest. So when a slab turned warm beneath one's hand, it was not taken lightly. In a quiet Bavarian priory, a novice named Tomas was assigned to clean the crypt. The air was close, unmoving, filled with candle wax and dust. As he brushed the moss from a century-old tomb, his fingers recoiled. The stone beneath was warm, as though it had been touched by breath. He pressed his palm again, still warm. He told no one. That night, the brothers awoke to the sound of footsteps in the chapel above. No doors opened. No one was missing. A censer swung once, slowly, then fell still. In the morning, the abbot had the tomb sealed with iron bands. Tomas was reassigned to the gardens. No name remained on the stone. The record of who lay beneath had long since faded. Some said the soul had never fully left. Others believed something else had settled in its place. Now, from warm stone to sacred silence, we move toward a monk whose wounds bled, but were never given. Level 27, the stigmata in the silent monk. In monasteries across Europe, stories passed quietly of men and women marked by suffering they had not earned. Stigmata, wounds mirroring the crucified Christ, appeared sometimes on saints and sometimes on those whose silence held more than piety. In a monastery outside Ravenna, a young monk took his vows and his silence on the same day. He spoke to no one, wrote nothing, but tended the herbs with a patience beyond his years. One Lent, blood began to soak the sleeves of his robe. His hands bore 2 small punctures. No blade had touched them. The other monks treated him with reverence and distance. He neither wept nor smiled. He bled every Friday before dawn, then healed without scar. When he died during Holy Week, they found, folded beneath his cot, a parchment of prayers written in blood. None could say when he had written them, or how. Some believed his silence was chosen. Others thought it had been taken from him, that something older than language had settled within. Let us step from flesh to wood, from prayer to protection, into the hearth, where something once carved was never meant to be found. Level 28. The talisman hidden in the hearth. Homes were built with more than timber and stone. Behind walls, beneath floors, and within hearths, people placed talismans, small figures, scraps of parchment, twisted herbs, to guard the space from what eyes could not see. When found, they were rarely disturbed. In a house outside Sussex, a mason repairing the chimney found something wedged behind a loose brick, a small wooden figure, no larger than a palm, with eyes scratched out and arms bound in string. A rusted nail pinned it to a scrap of linen marked with an unfamiliar symbol. The family had lived in the house for 3 generations. None claimed to have placed it. That winter, the youngest child began sleepwalking, always toward the hearth. The figure was burned at Easter. Afterward, the fireplace refused to light properly for months, coughing smoke into every room. Old protections, once unbound, do not forget their purpose, nor do the things they held back. Now we move from the fire's edge to the loom, where dreams shape thread and sleep reveals what hands alone cannot. Level 29. The Sleepweaver's Curse. Thread held power in the medieval mind, woven into cloaks, shrouds, and spellcraft. But when the act of weaving passed from waking hands to sleeping minds, people grew wary. A craft done in sleep meant something else had taken hold of the spindle. In Lubeck, a weaver named Bruna began rising in the night, eyes closed, body swaying. By morning, her loom bore flawless patterns she did not recall threading. They were intricate, knots of strange symmetry, symbols that made the village priest uneasy. By the new moon, her waking hours were listless. She pricked her finger often and bled into the cloth. The final night she wove, she dreamt of fire. In the morning, her cottage had burned to the ground. Bruna survived but never touched a loom again. They say she whispered once, "It was not my hand that guided the thread." Now we turn from the loom to the cradle. The infant sleeps, yet its name has already been spoken by someone who should never have known it. Level 30. The midwife who named the unborn. Naming held weight in the medieval world. It was not merely a label, but a claiming, a shaping of fate, identity, and soul. To name a child before birth was considered dangerous, sometimes even forbidden. It invited attention from things beyond. In Galway, a midwife named Aoife cared for a woman heavy with child. One night, Aoife dreamed of the birth and spoke the child's name aloud, Mira, though the mother had not yet chosen one. The next morning, she was silent. At the delivery, the child arrived early. The mother wept when the girl first opened her eyes and spoke. Not a cry, but the word Aoife. The room froze. The priest was summoned. The child thrived, but never spoke again. The midwife left the village before the week ended. No one saw her go. In years to come, other women in the village avoided speaking names aloud near swollen bellies. They whispered blessings, yes, but never names. For names, once spoken, can reach across boundaries, and sometimes something listens. We leave the cradle now, stepping softly into the space where bells ring without hands and old paths begin again. Level 31. The candle that burned blue. In the medieval night, candles were more than light. They were sentinels. Their flames told stories the eyes could not. A sudden flicker meant a visitor, a sputter a lie. And when a candle burned blue, without draft or reason, it was said a spirit had entered the room. In a manor near Ghent, a widow lit a taper by her husband's portrait each evening. One night, the flame burned pale blue. The air was still. She whispered his name, half in prayer, half in ache. The flame pulsed, rose higher, then steadied. That night, she dreamt of him, cold, smiling, seated beside her bed. The next morning, the candle was whole again. No wax had dripped. They say the blue flame sees what you cannot, hears what you whisper, and remembers what the world forgets. From flame to feather, we now follow wings that move against the wind, toward a bird that should not have flown where it did. Level 32. The bird that flew against the wind. Birds were messengers. They traced the boundaries between earth and sky, life and what might follow. But when a bird flew against the wind, or directly into a home, it was considered more than strange. It was a breach, a sign that something had been undone. In a cottage near Rouen, a dove forced its way through a shuttered window on a windless morning. The air was heavy, unmoving. The bird flailed, struck the wall, and collapsed. The wife of the house fell ill that same hour. By dusk, she was gone. The husband buried both bird and bride beneath the old tree. He planted lavender above them, but it never grew. Neighbors spoke of the bird's eyes, glassy, unfocused, as though it had not flown willingly. Some believed the wind had turned away in warning. Others said the bird had been pushed by something that needed a door opened. Let us leave wings behind now and enter the stone halls of the monastery, where one book refused to age, no matter how many years passed. Level 33. The book with untouched pages. Time weathered all things, stone, skin, even scripture. Yet in a scriptorium in Salzburg, one book defied that rule. Bound in soft calfskin, its cover bore the faded image of a lamb, its eyes too wide. The pages within were untouched by age. No mold, no fade, no brittling. The monks refused to read it. They called it Liber Silence, the quiet book. The tale goes that any who opened it heard whispers. Not loud, not cruel, just wrong. Words and languages no one claimed to know, sometimes in the reader's own voice. One monk copied a single page before falling silent for the rest of his life. The book was locked in a cedar chest, sealed with wax, and placed in the deepest corner of the library. But on certain nights, its clasp was found open. Knowledge in the wrong hands can wither. In others, it waits, perfect, patient, and untouched. Now we leave the library behind, into a quieter room, where thread met grief, and mourning took the form of needle and cloth. Level 34. The embroiderer who sewed the dead. Grief had its rituals, and one of them was thread. The women of the Middle Ages often marked mourning with the slow labor of stitching. But when one embroidered cloth for the dead and spoke while doing it, some believe her words might cling to the soul, anchoring it to this world. In Lisbon, an old woman named Yold was asked to sew a burial cloth for a child lost too soon. As she stitched, she whispered stories. Not prayers, not psalms, but lullabies. When the cloth was laid across the child's body, it shivered. The priest saw it move. The child remained still. The cloth, however, darkened near the edges, as if the thread had soaked more than dye. Yold never embroidered again. She took to silent prayer and left her needles to rust. From then on, villagers asked only the mute to sew for the dead. For words, once bound in thread, do not unravel. We now turn from cloth to stone, to the place where walls spoke in teeth, and time hid strange things between brick and beam. Level 35. The teeth found in the walls. Stone remembers what we hide. In old homes, builders found strange things sealed within. Broken dolls, shoes, locks of hair. But most disturbing of all were the teeth. In a manor outside Inverness, renovations uncovered a hollow behind the hearth wall. Inside, wrapped in aged linen, were 37 human teeth. No bones, no names. Some were small, still with roots. Others gold-capped. All were dry, ancient, and arranged in a perfect circle. The house had stood for centuries. No record of burial existed on the land. No grave. The family, upon hearing of the discovery, fled the property within days. The hearth refused to light after that. even with dry, kindling and bellows. A local priest came to bless the space. He entered alone, spoke no words afterward, and never returned. Teeth are tokens of life's labor. To hide them is to seal away the memory of pain or the echo of something that fed. Let us now leave the wall behind and step into the grain-strewn kitchen, where salt, a sacred guard, fails to fall. Level 36. The salt that would not fall. Salt was more than seasoning. In the medieval mind, it preserved the living and protected against the dead. It was scattered across thresholds, poured in circles, and blessed in holy rites. But when salt refused to fall, when it clung inside horn or spoon, it was a warning. In Bruges, a merchant prepared to eat alone after a long journey. He raised his salt horn and tilted it over his trencher. Nothing came. The horn was full, dry but unmoving. He tapped. Still nothing. He set it down and ate in silence. That night, a knock came at his door, soft like fingertips. When he opened it, no one stood there, but the candles inside blew out in unison. By morning, the merchant was fevered. He whispered of names he'd never spoken, of debt he did not owe. He died by sundown. The salt, found untouched, was thrown into the river. Now, from spice to stone, we climb toward the high walls of the Abbey Tower, where carved eyes once opened slowly close themselves. Level 37. The Virgin who closed her eyes. Statues in chapels were silent guardians, marble and wood shaped into holiness. They watched the faithful, absorbed the prayers, stood unblinking through plague, war, and season. But in Toledo, one carved virgin lowered her gaze. It was a boy who saw it first, kneeling alone after matins. He claimed the statue of Mary had closed her eyes, not fast, but slow, like sleep. He told the brothers. They dismissed him. 3 nights later, the tower collapsed during a windless dusk. No lives were lost. No explanation came. Afterward, none could swear if the statue's eyes had ever been opened to begin with. Some believed the vision was a gift. Others feared her withdrawal. Her gaze turned inward or away. The statue was moved to a cloister and veiled during Lent. Only on holy days was the cloth lifted, and even then, none dared look too long. Now we descend from stone to air, from gaze to scent, to follow the invisible trail of smoke that carried no flame. Level 38. The smoke that carried no fire. Where there is smoke, there is fire, unless there isn't. In medieval thought, scent alone could carry message or malice. A room that filled with smoke but bore no flame was said to be marked by spirit, omen, or the silent passage of something uninvited. In a convent outside Carcassonne, sisters began to smell smoke each morning at lauds. The halls filled with the scent of burning yew, sharp and sweet. No source could be found. No candles burned. No torches failed. One morning, Sister Colette collapsed in the chapel, her hands red with rash, her lips murmuring verses not found in the Psalter. The abbess fasted for 7 days. On the 7th, the smoke returned, but stronger. A trail led to the vestry, where nothing waited. Only a dry rose laid across the altar book. After that, the smell faded. The rose turned to dust. Colette did not speak again. Let us now listen for another silence, the kind that speaks through laughter in places where no living throat should be. Level 39. The voice beneath the floorboards. Some buildings breathe. Wood creaks, stones shift, old voices settle into plaster. But in a tavern in York, the sound came from beneath. Each midsummer, laughter bubbled up through the floorboards, faint and distant, as though a gathering continued below. There was no cellar, no space beneath. The floor was stone atop stone. Yet each year, on the same night, the same sound returned. Patrons began to leave before sunset. The innkeeper stayed, out of pride or fear. He claimed he once heard his own name whispered in the laughter, followed by a toast raised in his voice. When he died, the laughter grew louder for a time, then faded thin, became memory. Some said the tavern had been built atop a hall long buried. Others believed it was not built atop anything, but beside something unseen, something timeless. From laughter we pass in a dim light, a lantern that moves alone through fields no feet have crossed. Level 40, the lantern that walked alone. In the fields outside Dublin, travelers spoke of a lantern that floated just above the grass. It moved steadily, neither hurried nor hesitant, glowing faintly like breath behind cloth. There was no bearer, no path. The stable boy saw it first. He watched it from the hayloft, where the wind could not reach. Each night it appeared, pacing the far pasture, disappearing before dawn. One night he followed. He returned 2 days later, pale, silent, walking with careful steps. He never told what he saw, but he never again crossed the field, even in daylight. The lantern returned each spring thereafter, drifting through fog, a single light with no hand to carry it. They say some lights guide, others lead astray, and some are not for the living to follow at all. So we leave the lantern behind and rest for a moment. 40 signs have passed. The road continues, and stranger things await in the dusk beyond level 41. Level 41. The bread that refused to rise. Bread was sacred. It was the center of table and prayer alike, symbol of life, sustenance, and grace. In the medieval mind, when dough failed to rise without cause, it was not simply a matter of bad flour or forgotten yeast. It meant something unseen had passed through the home, something unwelcome. In a cottage on the outskirts of Canterbury, a woman known for her golden loaves prepared her dough as she always had. The oven was hot, the air was dry, yet when she returned, the dough lay still, flat, lifeless, cold. She tried again, and again. 3 days, 3 batches. None would rise. On the third night, she heard a soft knock at the back door. No one stood there, just a rolling pin leaning upright against the threshold, though she had left it by the hearth. She buried the dough in the garden and salted the oven stone. The next morning, the bread rose again, but no one said it tasted the same. In that kitchen, it was whispered something had wanted to be fed, and now we walk from oven to snow, to follow tracks that do not follow nature. Footprints that began, not with a step, but at the very door. Level 42. The footprints that led backward. Fresh snow was a blessing. It made the world quiet, clean, traceable. In winter, people watched the ground more carefully than the sky. Footprints told stories. But when tracks led backward, away from home, yet beginning at its door, no one spoke of it easily. A hunter near the Bavarian woods woke to find the snow outside his cabin disturbed. Bare feet, small, childlike, led away through the drifts. But there were no prints coming in, just a starting point, just a door. He followed them, heart in his throat. The prints moved deeper into the trees, until they stopped at the base of an old oak. Nothing beyond, only silence. He returned before dark and sprinkled ash across the threshold. That night, he dreamed of weeping behind the tree and woke with soil beneath his fingernails. The snow melted in spring, but he moved south before it returned. Sometimes, it is not the presence of footprints that frightens us, but their direction. Now we descend to the chapel below ground, where bells long buried still call out at dusk. Level 43. The buried bell that rang at dusk. When bells rang in churches and abbeys, their sound stretched through stone and sky. But when a bell long buried tolled once more, it stirred more than memory. it summoned something unsettled. In the village of Evru, a chapel once stood on a rise above the fields. When it fell to ruin, its bell was removed and buried beneath the altar, sealed with salt and scripture. For decades, the ground above it stood quiet, until one autumn evening, just as the sky turned the color of ash, the sound returned. One toll, then silence. The villagers froze in their doorways. The church had no bell. The bell had no tower. They dug, afraid but unwilling not to act. What they found was the bell, unchanged, gleaming faintly despite the years. It was cracked clean through, but still cold, as though untouched by earth. No one dared move it again. A stone slab was laid atop it, and prayers were offered every dusk. When the old things call, it is not always to be heard. Sometimes it is only to remind. Let us leave the tolling behind and wander toward a door that never opened, yet always revealed light. Level 44, the library with no door. Libraries and monasteries were built with care. Stone walls thick, windows high, doors barred and cataloged. Yet in the ruins of an abbey near Chartres, there remained one room with shelves full of books, though no door led to it. No stair, no archway, only a slit for air near the ceiling, and faint candlelight glimpsed from within on nights the moon was full. The room was first noticed by a stonemason restoring the west wing. He saw it from the scaffolding, a narrow chamber lined with volumes, all untouched by dust. One book lay open, its page turning slowly, though no wind stirred. When he returned the next day, there was no sign of the room from below, only bare wall, cold and featureless. Some say the room was a memory of knowledge forgotten. Others claim it was never meant to be entered, only watched. The monks who once walked the halls had no record of such a chamber. But each year, a single candle was left at the foot of that wall, lit and left to burn down. From sealed knowledge, we moved to buried sorrow, a cradle filled not with a child, but with stones. Level 45, the cradle filled with stones. There are times when grief must be carried in silence. In medieval households, when a child was lost before breath, not all were laid to rest in churchyards. Some were mourned in secret, and some were replaced with weight alone. In a village near Siena, a cradle was found beside the hearth of a home long abandoned. Neatly swaddled within, soft cloth, a carved rattle, and 5 smooth stones, each the size of a newborn's palm. No record remained of the family. The neighbors would not speak their name. The cradle was moved to the church, but flowers wilted beside it. The priest dreamt of crying, but found no voice when he woke. Eventually, the stones were buried at the foot of the chapel garden. The cradle was burned, yet the spot where it stood remained colder than the rest of the floor, even in summer. Sometimes, memory takes shape in objects, in cloth, in weight. Not all sorrow asks to be remembered, but it leaves signs all the same. Now we step softly away from wood and linen and look into the mirror, where what we see may not always be our own. Level 46, the reflection that moved first. Mirrors were rare in the medieval world, often no more than polished metal or hand-blown glass, cloudy and imperfect. Yet they held immense power in the imagination. Reflections were thought to be glimpses of the soul or of something watching back. And when the image in the glass moved before the viewer, it was seen as a warning, a fracture between what is seen and what is true. In a manor near Carpathia, a noblewoman prepared for a feast. As she fixed her hair before her silver-backed mirror, her reflection tilted its head, not in unison, but a breath ahead of her. She froze. The image smiled. She did not. The mirror was taken down at once, turned toward the wall, and covered with black cloth. The feast was canceled. The servants spoke in whispers, and the lady remained in her chamber for 3 days. When they finally entered, the room was cold. The mirror was bare. She was gone. The cloth was still folded on the floor. They say a mirror never lies, but sometimes it tells a story you are not meant to hear. Let us turn now to the high pastures, where a shepherd's tune echoes without breath. Level 47. The shepherd's pipe that played alone. The hills were often empty, save for the sound of wind, the bells of sheep, and the low call of a shepherd's pipe. These tunes were simple, familiar, comforting, but when a melody played with no breath behind it, villagers knew to stay indoors. In the Pyrenees, an old shepherd named Emile was known for his song, played each dusk as his flock returned. After his death, the pipe was buried with him, laid across his chest in a coffin of pine. The night after his burial, his tune floated down from the ridge, soft and thin. Some said it was wind through the rocks. Others, that Emile had one last song to play. But the melody returned the next night, and the next. Sheep wandered closer to the grave. The pipe was dug up and removed. Still, the song came, always at the same hour, always the same notes. Eventually, no one climbed that hill after dark. The path grew over. The grave sank. Some songs are not about remembering. Some are about not being forgotten. Let us leave the wind behind and walk among words toward a book of names, now eerily blank. Level 48. The prayer book that lost its names. Books of hours were sacred. Personal prayer books, passed from hand to hand, marked with births and deaths, scribbled with notes, softened by touch. To open one was to look into a lineage, and so when the names vanished, it was as though lives had been unmade. In a monastery near Bruges, a novice opened his grandmother's book of hours, one passed down through 4 generations. The margins once filled with family names were now blank. The ink had not faded. It had vanished, clean as untouched parchment. Only the illuminations remained. Saints, vines, halos, and gold leaf. But the names, their stories were gone. He brought the book to the elder brothers. They too could see the emptiness. When he returned it to its shelf, a new name appeared in the final page. His own. The novice took no vows. He left the monastery and was never seen again. The book remained locked in a drawer. It is said that once a year, on the feast of Saint Dymphna, another name vanishes. We now turn from vellum to glass, from ink to storm, to the windows that bled though nothing struck them. Level 49. The window that wept red. Glass was both a barrier and a blessing, scarce and precious in medieval homes and chapels. Light passed through it, but evil was believed could not. So when windows ran with red, it was taken as a rupture between protection and peril. In a watchtower near the coast of Kent, a guard awoke to find crimson streaks down the eastern window. No bird had flown into it. No storm had come. The pane was unbroken, but the red ran slowly, as if the glass itself had bled. He washed it clean, but the color returned the next morning, deeper and thicker. On the 3rd day, the tower's bell fell from its rope and split in 2. No wind, no hands. The townspeople sealed the window with oak boards and an iron cross. No one returned to the tower after that, save the crows. They say the sea mist sometimes paints the wood red, as if remembering. Let us descend now to fire and ash, toward the embers that would not cool. Level 50. The ashes that would not cool. Fire was both a tool and a threshold. In rites and rituals, in hearth and pyre, it marked endings and beginnings. When flames died, warmth faded quickly. Ash cooled. The world moved on. But not always. In a village nestled along the Welsh border, a hermit died in winter. A pyre was built in the grove he loved. The fire rose, then fell, and the mourners scattered. But when a child returned the next day, the ash still glowed. Days later, it remained warm. Snow fell. The ashes steamed. No one could explain it. The priest brought holy water. The ground hissed when it touched. They dug beneath the pile and found no bones. Only smooth stones, blackened and dry. Some claimed the hermit had never been buried. Others believed something else had taken his place in the fire, something not ready to let go. Now we close this chapter with warmth on our hands and questions in our breath. 50 signs now behind us, 50 still ahead. The road winds on, gentle and strange, into the sleeping dark. Level 51, the hare found in the loaf. Bread was sacred in the medieval household, shared daily, blessed at feast, broken in grief. Its making was an act of order, of care. So when something unfamiliar appeared within it, something not belonging to wheat or water, the balance of the home felt undone. In a cottage near Lübeck, a woman sliced the morning loaf and paused. Coiled within the crumb was a length of black hair, long, wet, and not her own. She lived alone. That evening, her hens refused their feed. The milk soured. The hearth gave off no warmth. She buried the rest of the loaf at the edge of the woods and marked the spot with a sprig of rowan. Her neighbors watched her door carefully after that. She did not fall ill, but she spoke less, and no one accepted her bread again. In many places, finding hair in bread meant more than poor baking. It meant interference, a charm misplaced, a spell twisted back. Now we leave oven and earth behind and step into shadow toward a bed where 2 bodies slept, but 3 shadows fell. Level 52, the shadow that lay beside the sleeper. The hearth had long cooled. The cottage was quiet. In the dim light of a waxing moon, a woman rose to fetch water and paused. Her husband still lay asleep in their bed, but not alone. Beside his still form, upon the wall, stretched not 1 shadow, but 2. In the village near Saxony, it was said that a second shadow meant the presence of another. Unseen, uninvited, perhaps not wholly alive. It might be a warning. It might be a tether. She lit a candle, but the second shadow did not flicker. She called his name. The shadow vanished. Her husband woke with a gasp and fever that would not break. By week's end, he was buried. The wall bore a faint mark where the second shadow had once fallen. A priest washed it with ash and holy water. Still, the dog refused to enter the room again. In the Middle Ages, what moved without form was often more feared than what bled. And shadows, especially the wrong ones, were watched like omens. Let us walk now from flicker to figure, from the presence unseen to the stone that aged while all else stayed young. Level 53, the statue that aged overnight. Stone endures. In the medieval mind, it was the material of prayer, permanence, and the holy. A statue might weather across centuries, but not in a single night. In the garden cloister of a convent near Siena, a statue of Saint Bridget stood beneath the open sky. Carved in white marble, her face serene, her hands raised in benediction. For 40 years, the stone remained untouched by moss or crack. Then one spring morning, the sisters found her different. Her features had slumped, her eyes hollowed, her surface worn and brittle like sun-bleached bone. The pedestal crumbled beneath her feet. No storm had come, no frost, just a night of calm and quiet. The statue was removed, wrapped in linen, and buried behind the chapel wall. A new one was commissioned, but none approached it after Vespers. Not even the sparrows landed near. It is said that time forgets nothing, but sometimes it remembers too quickly. Now let us leave the stone behind and step toward running water, where once a stream teemed with life, and now not even the light dares to follow. Level 54. The river where fish would not swim. Rivers fed the soul of the medieval countryside. They were baptisms, boundaries, and breath. When one went still, clear yet empty, it was as though something deeper had been drained. In a valley south of Bohemia, a stream once rich with trout and minnows turned barren. No fish, no frogs, not even reeds along the bank. The water ran cold and clean, yet lifeless. The villagers whispered that a shepherd's son had drowned there the year before, pulled beneath the current without cry or struggle. His body was never found. Since then, the river had gone silent. Children claimed they saw shapes in the water, not reflections, but watching eyes. No one dared draw water from its edge. A stone cross was placed at the ford, but even it darkened with lichen faster than stone should. Life, it was believed, could retreat from a place. And when it did, something else moved in. We leave the dead waters now and return to flame, to a light once strong, now gone with a breath not drawn by man. Level 55. The breath that extinguished fire. Candlelight was sacred in the medieval world. It marked safety, sanctity, and presence. To watch it flicker was comfort. To watch it die, without wind, without breath, was cause to kneel. In a monk's cell near Aragon, a single taper burned each night beside the psalter. One evening, the monk sat reading softly when the flame bent sharply, as if pushed by unseen breath. Then without sound it vanished. The room grew cold. The wax remained whole. No draft stirred the drapery. He relit it, hands trembling. The flame returned, then pulsed, and died again. He did not try a third time. The next day, the abbot found him at prayer, eyes open, mouth closed as if in midword. He never spoke again. They moved the psalter to the chapel. The candle remained untouched. Not all extinguishing is absence. Sometimes it is the breath of something not meant to linger, something older than flame and more patient. Let us step softly now from the breathless flame to skin and symbol, where sleep leaves behind not dreams, but marks that should not exist. Level 56. The symbols carved by sleep. When the body sleeps, the mind is said to wander. But in the medieval imagination, it was not always the soul that stirred in slumber. Sometimes the body bore marks left by something not of this world. In a remote village in Carpathia, a miller rose one morning to find 3 symbols etched in perfect symmetry across his chest. 3 circles joined by thin lines, unbroken and pale as if drawn in ash. He remembered no dream, no pain, only the strange cold that clung to him, even beneath wool. The local priest bathed him in blessed water, though the miller did not flinch. For 7 nights, he did not sleep again. The marks did not fade, nor did they fester. By the 8th night, they were gone, leaving no scar, only silence. In the centuries that followed, it was whispered that the marks were signs of visitation, not from devil or angel, but something ancient and indifferent. A tracing of presence, a record of touch. The body, they believed, could be used as parchment by those who had no tongue. Let us leave skin and symbol behind and walk into the orchard now, where fruit ripened with no scent and fell not even once. Level 57. The orchard of eternal fruit. The trees bloomed in spring, as they always had. Pear blossoms floated like snow across the soft earth. But when summer came, the fruit held firm, too firm. The pears swelled, golden and full, but none dropped. None rotted. None fed bird or man. In a hamlet near Cornwall, an orchard stood untouched by time. The villagers passed it with bowed heads, speaking neither praise nor prayer. The eldest remembered a tale. A traveler once dared to steal a pear. He bit into ash and never spoke again. The trees gave no shade. Bees avoided the blossoms. A hedge grew around them of its own accord, thorned and thick. When lightning struck the oldest tree, it bled water, clear and cold, not sap. No one walked there after that. Some said the orchard was planted on cursed ground. Others said it was a gift left behind by something not human, and the gift had simply been misunderstood. In the medieval world, fruit that never fell was not bounty, it was burden. Now we turned from grove to stone, stepping into a chamber where summer's heat never reached, and breath turned white in the air. Level 58, the Chamber of Winter's Breath. In the high towers of Brittany, among the chill sea winds and moss-grown stone, there stood a room untouched by time or warmth. It was known as La Chambre Morte, the dead room. Even in the height of summer, when candles melted before being lit, this chamber remained cold. One's breath smoked inside it. Torches flickered as if starved. Birds avoided the window ledge. Mice turned from the threshold. The lord who had once built the tower had died in that room, alone, during spring, with no wound and no witness. Since then, the chamber had been locked. But the key, it seemed, turned itself each May, and the door stood open, if only for one night. A new steward once dared to sleep there. He awoke with frost on his lips, though no window was broken. He left before dawn, refusing to return. Cold, in medieval belief, was not simply weather. It was memory. It was presence. Let us now descend, out of stone and silence, toward a timekeeper that forgot how to move, yet still held lives within its glass. Level 59, the hourglass with no sand. In the scriptorium of a monastery near Tours, an hourglass sat on the abbot's desk. Its twin bulbs perfect, its wood carved with saints and beasts. For years, it marked their copying hours. Then one morning, it stopped. Not shattered, not jammed, simply empty. No sand, no trace of grain, just hollow glass, cold to the touch. The monks searched for an explanation. No hand had touched it. No dust lined its case. And yet, the abbot, who had watched it daily for 30 winters, fell ill that week. He passed before the bells of Compline rang. They replaced the hourglass with another. But every Friday at Vespers, it too would pause, sand suspended mid-fall. The monks covered it with linen, recited the psalms, and lit a candle beside it. The flame curved away from the glass. To the medieval mind, time was not simply measured. It was inhabited, and when the measure stopped, the soul took notice. Now we step away from time and into thread, from glass to spindle, where a weaver found the end of her tale, not on cloth, but in skin. Level 60, the thread that would not end. In Andalusia, an old woman spun thread by candlelight. Every evening, her spindle word, her fingers a blur, her lips silent. Her will was fine, her thread flawless, but never stopped. One day, she realized the spool had long been full. Yet the thread kept coming, winding endlessly, spilling across the floor like pale vines. Neighbors knocked, drawn by the light seen from her window deep into the night. She answered once, eyes glazed, hands still moving. When they found her days later, the room was silent. The candle had burned to its base. She lay wrapped in her own thread, spun round like a cocoon, her hands still clutching the spindle. Her eyes were open, watching the ceiling as if counting stars. No scissors were found. In the medieval world, thread was fate. To spin without end was to echo the work of the fates themselves, those who wove the lives of kings and beggars alike. To stop spinning was to die, but to never stop, that was something worse. We now leave the wheel and spool, carrying 60 signs in silence. Ahead lie deeper dreams and stranger truths, should you choose to follow. Level 61. The bell rope that pulled itself. In a fog-cloaked village near Ghent, the chapel bell was silent for most of the year, save for feast days and funerals. Its rope, coarse with age, hung still as the air. But one cold dawn, as the last star faded, the bell rang thrice, low, deliberate, mournful. The rope had not been touched. The priest rose from his sleep and found the sanctuary locked. The windows were sealed, yet the air carried the scent of candle wax and cold iron. He stepped inside and found the altar lit, one taper burning without wick, no wax beneath it. Outside, frost curled along the chapel stones like vines. A stranger was found frozen by the door at sunrise, eyes open, hand raised as if knocking. The rope was tied and nailed to the beam the next day. Still, it trembled every Lent. In the medieval mind, bells marked not only time, but passage of seasons, of souls, of unseen visitors. And sometimes the bell called not for the living. Now we descend from tower to crypt to the skull that should have stayed silent. Level 62. The skull that wept red. In the crypt beneath a monastery in Florence, a reliquary of bones sat in silent reverence. It belonged to a young martyr, her skull enshrined in silver and glass. For centuries, it remained untouched, wrapped in prayer and dust. One morning, a novice sweeping the aisle glanced into the case and paused. A single bead of red clung to the bone's crown, bright, wet, unexplainable. He called the abbot, who arrived in silence and stared. "Seal it," he said. "Say nothing." The skull was moved to a private cell, but the red mark returned every Thursday at twilight, even when the case was replaced. The novice who first saw it vanished a month later. His sandals were found by the cloister gate, undisturbed. To the medieval faithful, blood was proof of sanctity or unrest. A bone that bled meant something still suffered. We walk now from blood to bloom, to the flower that should not have grown at all. Level 63. The flower that grew at night. The garden behind the abbey in Wales was tended only by moonlight. Sisters claimed certain herbs took root best when sown after Compline. But one night, beneath a waning moon, a white lily bloomed beneath the window of a novice's cell, though no bulb had been planted. She found it at dawn, trembling, the soil untouched. The flower had no scent. By vespers, the girl fell ill. She passed in her sleep, a faint smile on her lips. The flower withered and crumbled to dust. No one dared disturb the soil again. A circle of stones was placed around the spot, and silence became its guardian. Flowers were omens. Beauty born in wrong hours meant sorrow, especially when their bloom foretold a soul's departure. Let us walk on now, beyond root and stem, to where steel lies buried and sings. Level 64. The sword that hummed in the ground. On the moors of Normandy, a knight was buried with his sword, deep beneath stone, beneath soil, beneath time. His grave was left unmarked, known only to his squire in the wind. Yet one summer, a shepherd grazing his flock nearby heard a sound, low, metallic, vibrating through the grass like bees beneath earth. Each evening at sunset, the hum returned, a dull song with no source. The local smith said it was the voice of forged metal longing for battle. The priest said it was unfinished penance. The villagers offered no opinion. They simply walked a longer path around the mound. In the Middle Ages, weapons held memory. Steel could carry grief. A blade that sang was not always mourning. It was sometimes waiting. Now we leave the hum in the earth and listen to a lullaby that should not be remembered. Level 65. The lullaby no one taught her. A young girl in Asturias sang herself to sleep each night. Her melody was soft, strange, older than her years. Her mother said she had never taught it. No one in the village recognized the tune. One evening, a wandering friar passed through. Hearing the lullaby from the window, he dropped his satchel and wept. He said the song was sung by plague wives 3 centuries before, grieving women who buried their children and sang into the soil so God might hear. The girl could not explain where she'd learned it. She stopped singing after the friar left. The house grew colder. Her dreams, she said, became quiet. In the medieval world, music lived beyond memory. Songs passed through blood, not parchment, and when a voice carries what no one remembers, it is said the past has found its breath again. Let us follow that breath now, into the woods, where fire glows but gives no warmth. Level 66. The campfire that gave no heat. In the heart of the Black Forest, travelers once spoke of a fire that burned beneath pine and star, but warmed no hand. It glowed like any other, soft orange flames licking at a ring of charred stones. Yet those who approached found the air still cold, their skin unchanged. One hunter, chilled to the bone, stretched his palms above it. Nothing. The flame danced, but gave no life. His breath still steamed. His fingers stayed numb. He turned and walked back to the tree line. They say he was never the same again. His eyes wandered even in sleep. Locals left offerings beside the clearing. Bread crusts, silver pins, and once a fox's paw. The fire remained, always where it had been, always just ahead of where you remembered it. In medieval lore, fire without warmth was not a blessing, but a beckoning. Spirits could light such flames to lure the lost or mark cursed ground. It was a question flickering in the dark. Do you trust what you see or what you feel? We now turn from flame to parchment, to a page that wrote itself in silence, with no hand to guide it. Level 67. The letter written in no hand. At a convent near Avignon, Sister Eloise rose before lauds to read her book of hours. Between the pages, she found a loose scrap of parchment. Upon it, a passage had formed overnight, ink dark and fresh, yet no pen in the scriptorium had touched it. The words were in Latin, though she did not know the tongue. Still, she understood. The message spoke of a gate that could only be seen when the wind stopped, and a bell that would toll once for each soul forgotten by name. It ended with a symbol, a circle crossed by 3 thorns. She brought the page to the abbess, who blanched and hid it beneath the altar. No one spoke of it again, but the parchment returned each month, always in a different book, always with new lines. Some believe it was prophecy, others called it temptation. In the medieval mind, writing was sacred, an echo of divine thought. But when words came unbidden, they were feared not as knowledge, but as intrusion. Let us now leave ink and vellum and follow hooves across the field, though no mark is left behind. Level 68. The horse that left no prints. Snow blanketed the road to the Abbey of St. Bricius, fresh and soft, unbroken by wind. At dawn, a gatekeeper opened the doors to find a lone rider approaching, his black horse silent, sleek, sure-footed. But behind them, the snow remained pristine. No hoof prints, no stir or indent. The rider bore no heraldry. He dismounted and entered the chapel without word. Monks who saw him said he prayed, though no one heard a single breath. When the bells rang sext, he was gone. Outside, the snow still lay undisturbed. The monks fasted for 3 days. One swore the chalice trembled during Mass. Another claimed he saw the figure again, beneath the crucifix, long after Compline. To travel without trace was a mark of the unearthly. In medieval thought, even beasts bore the weight of presence. A horse that left no prints meant its burden was not of this world, or had already crossed into another. We leave now the snow and silence, turning toward brass and balance, where scales tipped without touch. Level 69. The scales that tilted without weight. In the marketplace of Verona, merchants trusted their scales as they trusted the sun. Fair measure was sacred. But one morning, a baker's copper scale began to sway before he placed the first loaf. He reset the beam. It tilted again. No wind, no tremor, just a lean, as if something invisible bore weight upon it. He weighed no bread that day. Instead, he knelt and whispered a prayer his grandmother had taught him, the one used to bless the dead when their name could not be spoken. Later that evening, his daughter confessed to theft. The baker wept and forgave her. The scale did not move again. In the medieval soul, justice lived in symbols. When an object turned against its purpose, it was said to be judging, not the bread but the bearer. Now we leave the marketplace and walk the hidden paths to a door that welcomed once and was never seen again. Level 70. The door that was never found again. The boy had chased his dog across the moor near Tintagel. Rain threatened. The dog vanished behind a hedge, and there, just beyond the thistle, stood a stone archway draped in ivy. He passed beneath it. Light shifted. The air grew still. Before him stretched a garden with trees that shimmered silver and red. A woman with no face offered him an apple. He turned, afraid, and fled the way he came. When he returned with his father, the hedge was there, the grass trampled, but the doorway was gone. No arch, no ivy, only fog. He dreamed of the garden each night, of birds with voices like bells, of paths that circled in perfect squares. Doors in the medieval world were not always built by masons. Some opened with need, some with grief, others only once. And when they vanished, those who had passed through were never quite the same. Now, with 70 signs behind us, we rest again at the threshold of another dream. Let the stillness grow. The candle is not yet out, and the omens wait. Level 71. The cry that echoed before birth. In a frost-covered village near Prague, a woman heavy with child stirred from slumber just before dawn. She sat upright, a chill creeping through her bones, not from cold, but from a sound. A soft, distant wail, neither wind nor dream. A baby's cry, though none yet lay in the cradle. Her husband heard nothing. The midwife, when summoned, paled but said little. On the third morning, the cry returned, louder now, echoing against the wooden beams as though from beneath the floor. The child was born silent, wide-eyed, never uttering a sound in life. He grew pale and thoughtful, watching shadows move before others saw them. Some said he had already cried all his cries, before breath, before name. In a medieval mind, such a birth was not simply strange, it was marked. To cry before entering the world was to come already knowing something that could not be said. We now leave the cradle behind and climb the monastery steps, where a saint's relic turned away from the light. Level 72. The relic that refused to face east. In a chapel perched high above Rouen, the reliquary of Saint Clotilde had always rested facing the east, aligned with the rising sun, as all holy objects should be. It was turned with prayer on each feast day, an act of reverence passed through generations of monks. But one morning, as the sun crested the hills, the reliquary stood facing west. No monk confessed to moving it. They turned it back. By morning, it faced west again. On the third day, the abbot ordered a vigil. 10 monks watched through the night, and still by dawn, the relic had turned. That winter, plague swept through the valley. The monks buried 6 of their own before spring. Some whispered that the saint had turned her back, not in defiance, but in warning, that to face east into the light required peace, and she had none left to offer. In a medieval spirit, movement without cause meant protest, refusal, or sorrow too heavy to bear. And now we descend from stone to soil, where a tunnel waits in stillness, a place without echo. Level 73, the tunnel with no echo. In the shadowed slopes of the Tyrolean Alps, miners unearthed a narrow tunnel veiled by stone and roots. When they sang into the passage, as was custom to test for depth, their voices vanished. No echo returned, not even a breath. They lit torches, entered slowly, but the flame dimmed. One man recited the Lord's Prayer. It was not heard beyond the third word. Another claimed he felt breath on his neck, though no one walked behind him. The tunnel was sealed the next day, a cross carved into the rock. Yet the wind still hissed through its cracks, not with words, but with memory. In medieval thought, echo was proof of presence, of stone listening, of air alive. A place that gave no echo was a hollow denied even to sound. Let's walk gently now towards silver that circles, coin that returns again and again. Level 74, the coin that was always returned. A silversmith in York paid a carpenter with a coin, newly cast, bright with luster. The carpenter tucked it into his belt, but the next morning it lay on the smith's table. He returned it again, and again it came back, once in a jar of flour, once nestled beneath his pillow, once hidden beneath an upturned shoe. They took it to the priest, who held it in salt and prayer. But that night, the priest himself found it beside the altar. Coins were sacred in trade, symbols of fairness and pact. A coin that refused to leave the giver's hand was no longer currency. It was a message. Some debts cannot be paid. Eventually, the smith cast the coin into the river Ouse. But it is said that the next frost etched its outline onto his window pane. Now we listen, softly, for the shepherdess who sang the skies open. Level 75, the tune that called the rain. In a dry summer near Provence, the fields turned to dust. The sheep grew thin. The air cracked. A shepherdess walked among the heather, her steps slow, her gaze skyward. She began to hum, a strange tune, low and lilting, not passed from mother nor sung in chapel. It carried like smoke across the pasture. Clouds gathered within the hour. Rain followed before dusk. Villagers knelt when she passed, but she claimed no knowledge of the song. She had only dreamed of water. The melody returned with each drought, always unbidden, always effective. When she died, the tune was never heard again. In a medieval soul, song was spell, breath was offering. And when melody summoned mercy, it was either miracle or memory far older than man. So ends our 75th omen. The path narrows now, and the sky darkens. But still we walk. Let the tune guide us onward. Level 76. The stars that faded from the sky. In the year 1271, a monk of Reims recorded 4 stars above the northern sky. Bright, steady, unlike any in known celestial charts. He marked them in careful ink upon vellum, assigning names drawn from ancient scripture. Yet when scholars returned years later to verify the record, no such stars were seen again. The heavens had shifted. The stars were gone. Some believed they had been omens, heavenly torches lit for a moment of passing fate. Others said they were never stars at all, but eyes watching the earth for one silent season. The monk's chart remains locked within the abbey's vault, too precise to be dismissed, too strange to be believed. In the medieval heart, the sky was scripture, divine, orderly, absolute. When stars vanished, they were not merely lost. They were taken. Let us now leave the stars and peer downward. into a stone well that gave back not your face, but another. Level 77. The reflection that wasn't yours. Near the forests of Vienna stood an ancient well, ringed by elder trees and worn with centuries. It gave clear water in darker tales. Children were warned not to lean too close at dusk. At that hour, it was said, the well did not return your own image. One girl, bold with youth, peered in as twilight deepened. She saw not her own wide eyes, but an older face, tear-streaked, familiar yet impossibly distant. She ran. From that day on, she never touched water from that well again. Years later, she would whisper that the face she saw was her own, many decades hence. Medieval belief taught that still water held more than reflection. It held memory, possibility, fate. To glimpse another face was not mischief. It was invitation. Now we rise from stone and water to a wooden chair that would not stop moving, though no hand rocked it. Level 78. The chair that never stopped rocking. In a quiet house near Dublin, an old rocking chair sat by the hearth. Passed down through generations, it had long ceased to move until the night a child was born beneath that roof. Since that night, the chair rocked gently each evening. No breeze stirred. No one touched it. It moved as if cradling something unseen. The family watched. They placed stones beneath its runners. Still it moved. A priest was summoned. He sprinkled holy water, placed a Bible on its seat. That night, the chair remained still for 1 hour only. Then began again, softer, slower. In the morning, the Bible lay open on the floor, its pages curled inward. In medieval households, an empty chair could be an invitation. One that moved of its own accord was more than eerie. It was acknowledgement. Something had accepted the welcome. Now we drift from wood to vellum, to a page inked by no hand at all. Level 79. The manuscript that wrote itself. In the monastery of St. Gall, a scribe left a blank folio upon his desk, intending to begin a psalter at dawn. Yet when morning came, the page bore a full stanza. Gold ink, curling script, perfect symmetry. None had entered the room. No pen lay nearby. The words were a prayer in a language the brothers could not read. The ink never dried. Each morning brought a new page. Verses grew darker, stranger, more impassioned. Some monks fasted. Others refused to approach the desk. On the 7th day, the script ceased. The original folio crumbled to dust, and the scriptorium fell still. Some said it was angelic, others demonic. Most simply prayed more often. In the medieval imagination, writing was a sacred act, a trace of divine thought on human hands. When ink appeared unbidden, it was no longer writing. It was revelation. Now we turn from word to shadow, to a man who walked in daylight, yet cast none. Level 80. The Pilgrim Without a Shadow. One spring morning in Toledo, a man in a travel-stained cloak entered the city gates. The guards noted nothing strange, until the noon sun struck the square and cast long shadows of every passerby. Except him. The pilgrim moved easily, quietly, seeking no attention. But a child pointed. He has no shadow. The merchants grew still. He paused at the cathedral steps, bowed to the closed doors, and disappeared down an alley no longer marked on any map. That evening, the square remained in hush. No one spoke his name, for none had asked it, but the place he stood was avoided ever after. In medieval thought, shadow was more than silhouette. It was proof of soul, a tether to the mortal realm. A man without one was either more or less than human. And so, with 80 omens behind us, we close the book gently for now. But the night lingers and the candle burns on. More still waits, should we dare to dream further. Level 81. The door that locked itself at dawn. In a weathered manor nestled between the fields of Flanders, there was a cellar door that never stayed open past sunrise. The servants said it creaked closed just as the light first touched the windows, though no wind ever blew and no latch was set. One morning, the cook forgot her herbs below. She crept down before dawn and left the door ajar. As she turned to ascend, the door slammed shut behind her. Her scream never reached the upper floor. They found her later, sitting on the stone steps, pale and silent, her apron torn and damp with dew. From that day, the cellar remained locked, the key buried with the master who built the house. In the medieval world, thresholds were sacred, lines between what belongs and what is not. A door that closed on its own, especially at dawn, did not protect the living. It sealed something away. Now we leave wood and lock behind and drift into a chamber where time moved, but only in the dark. Level 82. The clock that ticked only at night. In the chapel tower of Brittany, a great brass clock sat dormant through the day. The townsfolk passed beneath it, never hearing a chime. Yet those who slept nearby spoke of steady ticking, rhythmic and slow, echoing just beneath the walls. A pilgrim once stayed overnight, lodging near the tower base. At dawn, he awoke pale, hands trembling. He claimed to have counted the ticking, one beat for every name he'd ever forgotten. The clock, when examined, bore no mechanism. The gears had long rusted away. Time, in medieval thought, was sacred, marked not in seconds, but in prayers, seasons, and bells. A clock that moved when no eyes watched was no longer a machine. It was a measure of something else entirely. Let us now turn from hours to teeth and witness a birth the midwife refused to record. Level 83. The baby born with teeth. In a candlelit corner of a stone house in Marseille, a midwife crossed herself 3 times. Before her lay a newborn, swaddled, calm, and bearing a row of 4 small teeth. The mother wept in fear. The midwife, trembling, whispered a prayer and refused to name the child. Some said he was touched by prophecy. Others called him marked. He never cried. His eyes followed shadows long before he could speak. By his 2nd year, he wandered into the forest and was found sleeping beneath a standing stone, clutching a bird's feather and a bone. In the medieval imagination, children born with teeth were omens of greatness or ruin. To begin life, already armed, was to defy the natural order. Now we step from cradle to chalice, to wine that turned to brine. Level 84. The chalice that turned bitter. The Mass had begun in the chapel of Danube's Bend. The wine poured, crimson and full. But as the priest lifted the chalice, he paused. A bitterness rose to his throat, and he spilled a single drop. It fell thick and gray. The wine was sour. No rot, no heat, no fault of the vintner. Yet those who drank felt a tightening in their chests. That night, the village's oldest noble died in sleep, clutching his rosary to his heart. The next morning, the chalice was found cracked, split clean down its stem. To medieval believers, the Eucharist was not just ritual, but covenant. When wine turned bitter, it spoke of impurity, of sins unspoken. Now we step away from lips and cup and hear the voice that did not belong to the speaker. Level 85. The voice that spoke in another's tongue. A washerwoman in Gdansk, who had never read nor written a word, began to murmur lines of perfect Greek while scrubbing linens beside the river. A priest passing by heard her and dropped his satchel. She recited a psalm from memory, one long faded from use. When asked where she had learned it, she wept and said, "In the hush between dreams." After that day, she never spoke again. In the medieval world, language was not only tool, but mystery. To speak what one should not know was to pierce the veil, perhaps touched by the divine or by something else entirely. Let us walk now into the fading hour and continue our descent into the final levels of shadow and sign. Level 86, the Tower Without Steps. Atop a windswept ridge in the Tuscan hills stood a solitary tower, weathered by centuries but unmarred by time. Its stone was pale and smooth, with no doorway, no stairs, and no visible path within. Yet, each winter's eve, smoke curled faintly from a narrow window near the summit. A shepherd, curious and bold, climbed the ridge one dusk. He placed his ear to the wall. Inside, he heard a soft hum, like prayer or mourning. No echo answered when he called. When he returned to the village, he spoke little, save to say, the air inside breathes differently. Locals left offerings near its base, bread crusts, feathers, wax dolls. None dared linger long. The wind near the tower always turned colder than elsewhere. In a medieval imagination, unreachable spaces held those who had either transcended or been forsaken. A tower without steps was not built for man. It was built to contain or conceal what should remain above, unseen. Now, we descend into the earth, where a hole defied every effort to close. Level 87, the hole that would not close. In a quiet glen outside Ghent, farmers toiled to fill a narrow sinkhole that reopened each spring. They poured in stones, clay, even holy water blessed thrice over. But by dawn, the ground yawned once more, unchanged. A traveler once peered into its depth and claimed he heard weeping, not echo. Another swore to see a flicker of light deep below. One child dropped a pebble and said it never landed. The hole was eventually left alone. A ring of iron was laid around it, and prayers were whispered on feast days. Still, animals refused to graze near it. In medieval belief, the earth was not inert. It breathed, remembered, and responded. A wound in the soil that would not heal was no mere geological oddity. It was a mouth, or a memory. Let us now approach the broken gate, where metal cried without motion. Level 88, the gate that screamed without wind. In Brittany, at the edge of an abandoned estate, stood a rusted iron gate flanked by ivy-choked walls. Its hinges were fused shut, its bars twisted and still. Yet under the full moon, villagers claimed they heard it scream, a wrenching sound like iron tearing or a woman in pain. No breeze stirred, no beast passed. The sound came always at midnight and lasted a single breath. A widow once followed the cry and placed her hand upon the gate. She fell into a faint. Upon waking, she whispered, "It's mourning something or someone." In medieval lore, iron was a protector, a binder of spirits. When it howled, it did not resist, it remembered. And so, we step back from rust and cry, and open the book that never read the same way twice. Level 89, the book that changed each reading. A scholar in Austria received a gift, a weathered folio said to be penned by a nameless monk. The first time he opened it, it held a genealogy of saints. The second time, poetry about fire and grief. On the third, a list of names, his own among them. Each reading offered something new, or perhaps something the reader was not ready to see before. He locked the book in a chest and sealed it with wax. Still, at night, he dreamed its pages turning. Books in the Middle Ages were not merely repositories of knowledge. They were vessels of spirit. One that changed its message was said to respond not to time, but to soul. And now, for one last step in this chapter, we open the door that was never found again. Level 90, the room that was never there again. A monk fleeing bandits in the hills of Aragon stumbled into a stone chapel ruin, broken by weather and time. Desperate, He opened a wooden door at the rear and entered a warm chamber lit with candlelight. He collapsed onto a cot and slept. When he awoke, the chamber was gone. No door, no walls, just stones and weeds. He held in his hand a single beeswax stub, still warm. He never spoke again, but spent his remaining years copying psalms with trembling care. In medieval thought, rooms that appeared once and vanished were not built by hands. They were given shelters between worlds, granted only when truly needed and never again. We close this chapter softly. The hour deepens, but 10 final omens still wait, just beyond the veil of sleep. Level 91. The lantern that lit only for the dying. High in the cloisters of a convent near Toulouse, an old iron lantern hung untouched for generations. Dust had long settled on its rim, and the sisters no longer kept oil in its bowl. Yet one winter evening, as vespers faded into silence, the lantern glowed, a flicker steady and soft. No one had lit it. No hand had touched it. And yet it burned. That same night, Sister Beatrix, eldest of the order, bowed her head in prayer and quietly passed. The light died with her final breath. It happened again, years later, for another soul nearing the veil. Each time, the lantern offered no heat, only light, and always for one who would not see morning. In medieval belief, the threshold of death was not a sudden gate, but a slow unfolding. When light came unbidden, it was not illumination, it was accompaniment. We now step gently through the dust of memory toward the footprints that never were. Level 92. The dust that held no footprints. In the abandoned sacristy of a ruined chapel, dust lay thick as velvet across the stone floor. No one had entered for decades, so the villagers believed. But each spring, the altar cloth appeared freshly folded. Candles stood upright. Pages of the old missal turned, one at a time. Yet the dust was never disturbed. No step marked its surface. No hand left trace. A friar once entered with a torch. He said he felt a presence, watchful, not unkind. He stayed one night, then returned silent, his eyes rimmed with tears. To the medieval soul, dust was more than decay. It was a canvas of passage, a mirror of what moves. What stirs without imprint walks in another realm. Let us now look upon eyes that refuse to blink, open, unflinching for 40 nights. Level 93. The monk who never closed his eyes. On the edge of Lake Geneva, a hermit took a vow of stillness for Lent. Each dusk, he knelt before the stone crucifix and did not move until dawn. On the 5th day, the villagers noticed something stranger than silence. He never blinked. 40 nights passed. His eyes never wavered, never dried. A candle burned beside him, unmelted. On the final morning, the hermit was gone. No trace remained. Only his cloak folded at the base of the cross, and a single white feather resting where his head had been. The people said an angel had passed, or a man had seen too much. In medieval thought, blinking was not just reflex, it was the soul's retreat. One who never blinked was either blessed or undone. From still eyes, we look now to roots where none should be. Level 94. The tree with no roots. It stood alone in the field beyond Bruges, a slender tree with bark pale as bone and blossoms that opened in the dead of winter. No birds nested in it. No insects stirred near its branches. When a farmer dug to transplant it, the soil yielded nothing. No root, just dry earth. He dug deeper, found stone, carved faintly with a circle and 3 lines. That night, his dreams were filled with humming and the smell of lavender. He never touched the tree again. In the medieval heart, trees were sacred bridges between worlds. A tree without roots belonged neither to heaven nor earth. It was not planted, it was placed. And now we listen to a voice that came before any lips moved. Level 95. The voice that arrived before the words. A scribe in a Catalonian monastery began to notice something strange. Each time a monk spoke during readings, he heard the words seconds before their lips moved. At first, he blamed fatigue. Then the voices grew louder, some speaking things no one else said. One night, while alone in the scriptorium, he heard his own name whispered softly behind him. He turned. No one, only the flickering candle and the rustle of parchment. In the days that followed, he heard the monks recite prayers they had not yet begun. Eventually, he stopped speaking altogether. The abbey noted him touched by breath not his own. To the medieval mind, language was power, and a voice that outran the body spoke not from tongue, but from something deeper, something that watches where time falters. Now we journey onward, deeper into the realm of signs, toward the final omens of the quiet world between breath and shadow. Level 96. The candle that never melted. Beneath the vaulted silence of York Minster, deep in a crypt where stones swallowed sound, a candle was lit before the tomb of a forgotten bishop. It was meant to burn for 3 days in solemn vigil, a ritual of remembrance and light. On the first night, the flame glowed steady. On the second, it stood unchanged. And on the third, the priests grew uneasy, for the wick had not shortened and no wax had spilled. They watched it in silence. The flame gave no heat. The air around it held no scent of smoke. On the fourth day, as the morning bell tolled, the wick snapped sharply. All light in the chamber vanished. Torches, lamps, and the sacred flame itself, all extinguished as if swallowed whole. For 3 hours, the crypt was dark as burial cloth. In the medieval mind, a candle that did not melt defied the very nature of fire, a symbol of something that endured beyond the natural, and perhaps against it. Not all endurance is holy. What resists change may also resist peace. Now we listen to the bell that rang before the storm. Level 97. The bell that rang before the storm. The coastal village of Martin was quiet at midday, the sea calm, the sky a canvas of soft blue. Then, from the bell tower above the chapel, a single toll rang out, clear, slow, hollow. The bell rope hung still. No hand had touched it. Villagers turned toward the sound, brows furrowed, murmurs rising. The priest climbed the tower but found no birds, no intruders, no breeze. Just the bell swaying gently, though the air was still. An hour later, the sky turned black. Winds whipped the sea into a frenzy. Waves surged beyond the shore, swallowing homes, scattering livestock, carrying away half the village before the storm passed. Afterward, the bell was found cracked, the clapper resting on the chapel floor. It never rang again. In the medieval world, bells were more than calls to worship. They were alarms, sentinels against the invisible. A bell that tolled without cause did not cry out in error, but in warning. Warnings do not always shout. Sometimes they toll softly, hoping we will listen. We now pass to a room where time stood still. Level 98. The hour that repeated itself. In the manner of a minor nobleman near Krakow, dinner was interrupted by silence. The steward paused in the corridor, staring at the clock in the hall, its hands unmoved, its tick absent. Outside, a raven circled the tower thrice, then vanished into cloudless sky. The master of the house returned to his study and picked up his pen. Later, he would find the same sentence written twice in identical ink, though he had no memory of repeating it. The servants grew restless. Candles burned shorter than they should. The bells for Vespers never rang. Then, without cue, the grandfather clock struck 7, and the hour resumed. Plates clattered. breath returned. No one spoke of it, but all remembered. To the medieval imagination, time was sacred order. A moment repeated meant that the pattern had broken, an hour unmoored from God's plan. When time forgets itself, so do we. And in that pause, anything might step through. Now we hear the name that ended the wind. Level 99, the name that silenced the wind. The wind had screamed across the highlands for days, rattling shutters, flattening fields, tearing cloth from chapel eaves. Nothing could still it. Not prayer, not shelter. Then, at twilight, a traveler arrived at the village, mud-caked and hollow-eyed. He approached the well at the square's center and whispered a name, one he claimed had been taught to him by a blind priest deep in the Black Forest. No one else heard the name, but all heard what followed. Silence. Not calm, not peace. Silence. The wind died mid-gust. The trees froze. The river quieted. The birds did not return for days. The traveler left at dawn. His shadow stretched too long for morning. To the medieval world, names held immense power. Sacred syllables woven through creation. But names forgotten by man, passed only in hush, were never meant to be spoken again. Power rests in syllables, but the price is in the speaking. Now, the final omen, the mirror that showed no reflection. Level 100, the mirror that reflected nothing. In the palace of Aragon, a princess prepared for the spring feast. Her attendants brushed her hair, dressed her in ivory silk, and led her to the tall mirror of polished silver that had stood for generations in the bridal chamber. But the mirror showed nothing. Not her face, not her gown, not the flickering of candlelight behind her. Only emptiness. She touched the glass. Cold, solid, unyielding. She fainted before she could speak. That night, the princess disappeared from her bed. The doors remained locked. The mirror stood untouched. In the morning, her slippers were found before it, aligned as if waiting. The glass never reflected again. In medieval belief, the mirror was not merely glass, but a surface of soul, a place where truth and self met. To see no reflection was to lose tether to the body, or to stand already in the realm of the forgotten. What we seek in reflection is not always what returns, and sometimes it returns nothing. And so we have arrived. 100 omens, strange, silent, sacred. Let the candle dim, the echoes fade. You may rest now. Sleep well, for all things old and forgotten have waited long to be heard. In the deep hush of Avignon, during the plague year of 1348, the bells fell silent. Once, they had rung for every hour, every prayer, every passing soul. Their peals had once scattered storms, banished spirits, marked the rhythm of life and death. But now, with death pressing in from all sides, the priests dare not sound them. It was said that the ringing drew too much attention from forces seen and unseen. And so, in the heavy air of that long summer, the towers stood mute. Instead of sound, people turned inward. They lit candles that flickered through the night. They touched relics with trembling hands. They stared at stars not for beauty, but for signs. The silence was not peace. It was expectancy, the kind that waits, not knowing what may come. Even now, in a world that hums with electric light and reason, we hold echoes of that time. We knock on wood. We cross our fingers. We avoid naming things that frighten us. The medieval world sleeps beneath our skin, whispering, reminding. Mystery has not left us. It never did. Now, the Tower of Tales is complete. Let the candle burn low. Let the night settle. Sleep deeply, far from omens, yet close enough to dream.